through many periods where we've seen the Canadian government and also the provincial government, but primarily the Canadian government, pass legislation or policies that undermine what I just said, what the youth are seeking, which is their language, their culture, their spirituality, their ceremonies. Those policies undermine that very aspect of what would make any young person feel a part of the community or larger nation. There was policies that what I refer to as the Indian residential school. I'm also referring to a piece of legislation called the Indian Act. I'm not sure if these are the kinds of things I know most young people in elementary and secondary ought to know the history of Canada. And I remember going to a provincial school system way back then. I went to a place called Espanola Sacred Heart from grade 1 to grade 8, and Espanola High School from grade 9 to grade 12. And I remember addressing the students. This was years after when I was speaking to my community, and telling them what I recall as a First Nation student was some history lesson that made me want to hide under my desk when it came time for the First Nation history to be taught. It wasn't done, or it wasn't taught in a way that would make any First Nation person proud of what they contributed to this country. And we've contributed everything. Everything that we own, everything that we have, essentially being developed, being claimed, being owned by everybody else but the First Nations people. When you hear First Nation leadership and government come into conflict about having government redress, or at least have them implement what the treaties' spirit and intent are. Even though these treaties were signed, in my case, in 1850, I guess you would probably say, wow, that's wrong. How can that be relevant? How can that be, have anything to do with today's business, today's government? It has everything to do with it, because we're talking about a relationship. How Canada was founded, how Canada, or how Ontario come to be. It was through treaties. It was through our ancestors, and it was through certainly the settler governments sitting down and agreeing as to how we would share and how we would live side by side with the settler people with their own laws and regulations and their own governance, and recognizing that we've always been here as First Nations people with our own laws and our own governance, and it has to be respected, which is what I believe Maurice was talking to you about earlier this morning. That was the original understanding, and that's still the understanding of the First Nation leadership, First Nation citizens, that we are a distinct people, constitutionally recognized. We have our own languages, we have our own ceremonies, we have our own culture, and that needs to be respected. At the same time, it needs to be shared with many of our youth.
Yeah, well, it was a member of Alderville, North Switzer. He's also the editor for the Initiative newspaper. But he contacted me about a year and a half ago, and he was donating something to the school he went to when he was a youth himself, and just for appreciation. But he wanted to tie it in with First Nation education, and somehow use it as a tool to send a message to students off reserve or non-native what our issues are that's facing not just Ontario First Nation students, but all across Canada. So that's how the originally was developed.
There's struggles that are happening in Egypt. You're probably talking about Libya. I hope you're talking about some of these struggles all in other parts of the world. You see, what's so interesting about those struggles is who is it that's really engaged? Who are the ones that are at the forefront of those struggles? It's the young people. And how are they doing that? Even in places that are very poor, They're on social media. Is anyone here not on Facebook? Anyone here not on social media? There you go. There's only a few, and now they're getting funny looks from their classmates. You know, what? How does that work that people wouldn't be necessarily on it? Well, the age of the internet and the information age has been upon us for some time. You can instantly get information from around the world. And if there's a struggle going on, and if you're in a place like Egypt and you're being treated unfairly, you as young people, as they are doing overseas, are standing up and they're saying, it ends now. We're going to step forward as young people, and we're going to take control of our future, and we're going to say enough is enough. Well, there is a struggle, as you just heard alluded to, going on right here in this country. And it's not a good struggle. It's not a struggle that's between First Nations and the rest of Canada, between First Nations and white people. This is a struggle that's about equity. It's about fairness. It's about being kind to one another. It's about honoring the treaties that were made so long ago that are about a real relationship that's based on understanding. So it's a struggle to overcome deep misunderstanding. As we speak, I asked the chief, I said, what's the neighboring community that has around 75,000 people in it? And so he said Peterborough came up, or Oshawa. Does Oshawa have about that many people? Think about Oshawa, or the number of 75,000. Right now, in the borders of Canada, there are 75,000 people who are exposed to not having clean drinking water. There are mothers whose children are living in homes where they're not sure if their kids are going to get sick or not that day. Or they're getting up in places like Manitoba, where I recently visited, and they get up in the morning and they don't have indoor plumbing, so they've got slop pots in the winter because it's so cold to go to the outlets. This is not in Africa, this is not in South America, this is in the borders of Canada. There are about 85,000 homes needed in communities across Canada right now. I've been in communities where kids have not been to school for 2 years, and it really breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because I'm so fortunate to be born into a family who have tackled this struggle themselves as well, the struggle that you, by virtue of being here, by virtue of your very presence, you're saying to me as a young person, I'm going to participate and contribute from moving from impossible to possible. I'm going to step forward and be involved in the struggle to overcome misunderstanding.
Oh, it's still an important issue. You know what we're fighting every day. We heard the rumor, as I mentioned when I did my welcoming, there's a rumor of post-secondary funding being threatened by the government to pull it back. But what they're doing is maybe looking at a new system, a new way of dealing with post-secondary. And I don't know if that's taking it out of First Nation control. That's Alderville, where we got an excellent education committee. It's one of our oldest committees in Alderville, and we don't turn our eye towards any student, non-reserve or officer. They're all treated equally. So that's very important for us. That it's our jurisdiction, and I think we do a really good job. Our committee picking students for post-secondary. So even though we go by our priority list, because as the National Chief mentioned, that 2% cap we've been on since '94, and it affects our funding. You know, we're not equal to other students across Canada.
Funding for this school here, there is an average $2,000 to $7,000 per student gap between what the rest of Canada receives and what First Nations receive. This is happening right now in 2011. So when we look at the statistics, and it says that 49% of First Nation students graduate from high school, how many here are expecting to graduate? How many are expecting to graduate? I will graduate. That's what you're telling us when you say that. I love those expectations. That's the expectations that I want for all of our kids in First Nations communities, and we can achieve this. We can achieve this in our lifetime. I am confident of our ability to do this, particularly because this country, Canada, there are so many reasons to be proud of Canada, the work that we do around the world. We do deploy clean drinking water systems to Africa. We build schools in places like South America. Maybe some of you have been involved in some international humanitarian efforts. Right after the tsunami in Banda Aceh, you remember that a few years ago? I traveled there to work feeling for one another as neighbors in a global family. I stood there with a man who was explaining this is where his wife and his children were standing when the black wave, he called it, came into and took his family away, and he never saw them again. And I think about what's happening in Japan. Canada steps up right away, and we say we're going to support people across the ocean. I think about the Japanese because as a kid on those beaches I was telling you about, I used to find glass fishing balls that were wrapped in netting twine. And I always used to think, wow, I wonder what those people are like, because I had no idea. But they must be like us because they fish and they're on the ocean. I get that. That's the way I grew up. I understand that. We might have different languages and different cultures. But now today, in 2011, when I went home recently and was out harvesting herring eggs, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering about the radioactive material that had floated across the ocean that they were finding small amounts of in my own home territories on the West Coast. And so I think that the struggle that we have are on many fronts. They're about recognizing that we are in this together. That based on the treaties that the regional chief talked about, not just the First Nations ancestors signed treaties, the ancestors of many of you helped forge those relationships at the time of treaty making. So the Williams Treaty, if you live in the territory where the Williams Treaty is signed, that treaty is your treaty as well. It belongs to you. And as such, there's a responsibility to uphold and to support it, which begins with understanding, which is what you're doing here today.
For us here at Alderville, it's a real honor to have the National Chief just to make up a little bit of time to come here in the first place. Busy schedule. He is our National Chief for Canada, First Nations, but just to have him come here for a short time, talk to these young people and our own members that are here. It's very important to hear him speak. He's so elegant and knowledgeable about education.
To me, so often young people are told by older people, we're looking forward to being the leaders of tomorrow, being the future MPs or premiers or prime ministers or teachers or engineers or doctors or philanthropic people who set up foundations. But in my view, I think we really do need, because we've got such powerful access to the information age, we need you as young people to recognize we need your leadership right now. There are things that you as individuals can do that are just as powerful as any prominent person standing up, and certainly do not rely on the National Chief to make these things happen. I'm simply only one voice. What we need is a real groundswell that begins in moments like this, in exchanges like this. They've happened all over the world in the course of history. How is it that you think that women's rights were achieved and have made progress? That work isn't finished, right? There's still a ways to go. But it began somewhere. Those who study in that area know that it was women in the outskirts of places like Rio de Janeiro that were coming in from the forest, fighting for basic water and sewer for their children. That sounds familiar. That's what First Nations are fighting for. Or what about the dozen people in a printing shop in England 150 years ago who said slavery is wrong and it doesn't make sense? And 150 years later, I was there watching as an African American took the oath of office, standing on steps built by slaves. What this tells us is that it can come down to just a few people who have it in their heart to say, we are part of something here, there is a struggle going on, and as of right now, I'm going to do something about it.
When you accept the fact that everything is connected with everything else, without exception, without a single exception, then all things are explainable, all things are possible, all things are doable. And in the great notion of this wonderful universe and time, everything that can possibly happen will happen. It's nice to see some of our notions now being reflected in areas of physics. We can all actually prove things like chaos. We can all actually prove that things are inextricably tied with everything else. It gives a new meaning to how you carry yourself in life. Everything you do affects everything else. Now, that's a wild responsibility. I don't know about you, but it scares the blazes out of me. But one of the other implications implications of it is that you do have a voice. It does make a difference, and it will.
What I just really wanted to get across today with sort of how I got to where I am and, you know, my whole journey, were three things that I always try to tell you know, kids in my family about when they're in school and when they're thinking about what they want to do, to pursue what they love. When I was in high school, and I remember telling, you know, guidance counselors that I really loved writing and I was interested in that, and it was sort of, well, that's great, but you should look at what else is out there, you know, because sometimes, you know, the industry's so competitive and writers don't really make that much, and so see what else you're interested in. And I ended up going to school for law, because I thought, oh, you know, there's work in law somewhere. and it didn't pay off for me. So again, pursue what you love, no matter what it is. When I look back at my experience in university, you know, I think they're mistakes, but I also think of them as lessons learned. And I think every time you hit something, you hit a wall, you hit an obstacle, you make a mistake, you have to have a positive attitude and think that, you know, that it is a mistake, it's a lesson learned, and you move on, you go from there.
Well, I'm a graduate of Lakefield College School, which is more commonly known and affectionately known as the Grove School in Lakefield. And I've been kind of a delinquent alumnus, I'm afraid, for many years. And probably because going to reunions makes me feel too old. But I started thinking, what can I do that would help my school? And I've been working for the last 15 or 16 years in First Nations issues and education and politics. And I know that the vision of this national chief, Shawn, Atleo, is about education and the need for First Nations people to take our rightful place in the world, partly through better education opportunities. So I decided that I would start a program that we were going to call the Marsden Circles. That's in honor of my family, who were the first Native family to live in Lakefield, and who did have some connections with our school, actually. And so I decided that this would be the first event, hopefully of at least an annual event, to try to create more awareness among the students at Lakefield of First Nations and Aboriginal peoples and issues. So this was a good start. We had about 80 or 90 people here from the school, and I know that, as I said to someone, there could be a future Prime Minister of Canada in this group. You have to never be overwhelmed by the challenge of trying to get information to too many people. You have to do it one group at a time. This was a good start.